The keys trembled in my weathered hands as Charlotte's venomous words sliced through the morning air like a blade to my very soul. There I stood, frozen at the threshold of my own Yorkshire cottage, watching my daughter-in-law glare at me with pure contempt from my beloved conservatory. Why is that old Leech here? We don't have space for parasites. 68 years of life hadn't prepared me for this moment. My sanctuary in the Cotswolds, the stone cottage I'd built brick by painstaking brick after Harold's passing, had been completely invaded. 3 unfamiliar Range Rovers cluttered my gravel drive, thumping music echoed from my sitting room, and the acrid smell of burnt Yorkshire pudding filled the air. Charlotte's brats were trampling my prize-winning roses, kicking footballs against the greenhouse I'd saved 2 years to afford. My perfectly manicured lawn looked like Glastonbury after the festival, littered with empty Stella Artois cans and soggy takeaway containers from Nando's. When Charlotte spotted me through the French doors, she didn't show an ounce of shame. Instead, she planted herself in my doorway like she owned the bloody place, wearing my hand-knitted cardigan, the one I'd spent 3 months perfecting with Aran wool from Ireland. "Charlotte, I wasn't expecting you," I managed, my voice catching in my constricted throat. "This is my home. I've been coming here every bank holiday weekend for 15 years. Her laugh was cruel, calculated, the same laugh she'd given me at Christmas dinner when she thought no one was watching. "Oh, please, Elizabeth. James told me we could use the cottage whenever we fancied. We're actually doing something productive here, unlike you, just rattling about like some bitter old spinster." More faces appeared behind her. Her sister Imogen with her twin terrors, her grey-haired mother who looked at me like I was something she'd scrape off her Louboutins, and 3 strangers I'd never laid eyes on. There was an older bloke in a Chelsea FC shirt who seemed to be her uncle, a young woman bouncing a screaming baby, and another man casually smoking on my terrace as if it were his local pub garden. They all stared at me with barely concealed irritation, as if my presence in my own home was a terrible inconvenience. Charlotte's mother approached with the swagger of someone who'd clearly had too many Proseccos. "Is this the famous mother-in-law you're always moaning about?" she asked Charlotte in a voice dripping with mockery. "I thought she'd be more imposing. Looks rather ordinary to me." The malicious snickers pierced my heart like hot needles. There I was, a 70-year-old woman in my simple M&S cardigan and comfortable Clark's shoes, being dissected by complete strangers on my own property. "Where's James?" I asked, feeling my pulse quicken. My son had to be here somewhere. He'd explained this madness. Surely there'd been some dreadful misunderstanding. "James is at the office, as usual," Charlotte replied, crossing her arms. "Unlike some people, he has actual responsibilities. Look, Elizabeth, there's simply no room for you. The bedrooms are occupied, the kitchen's being used for proper family meals, and frankly, your presence would only create unnecessary tension." I felt the earth shift beneath my feet. She was actually ejecting me from my own home, the cottage I'd purchased with my widow's pension and the modest inheritance Harold left me, the place I'd lovingly restored room by room over 15 years of weekend trips from London. "Besides," Charlotte continued with a poisonous smile, "I've already discussed this with James. We've agreed this cottage needs proper utilization. It makes no sense sitting empty most of the time while you live quite comfortably in your Islington flat. We've got children who need space to grow and explore the countryside." Each word felt like a physical blow. 15 years of saving every spare pound from my position at the NHS, 15 years of choosing Tesco value over Waitrose so I could afford the mortgage payments, 15 years of weekend trips in my little Ford Fiesta to tend this garden and restore this cottage from near ruin. One of Charlotte's teenage nieces stepped forward with breathtaking insolence. "Why don't you just book yourself into a Premier Inn? Aunt Charlotte's absolutely right. There's no space for extra people." The cottage held its breath. Even the children had stopped their destructive play to witness my humiliation. I could feel their eyes boring into me, waiting for me to crumble, to give them the pathetic spectacle they were anticipating. But something deep inside me refused to break. Something that had survived Harold's sudden heart attack, survived redundancy at 55, survived building this life entirely on my own terms. "You're absolutely right, dear," I said with a smile that came from somewhere profound but didn't reach my eyes. I can see the situation perfectly clearly now. Charlotte's face lit up with victory, believing she'd won. The others seemed satisfied, as if they'd witnessed justice being served. They had absolutely no idea what they'd just awakened. As I walked away from my own cottage with measured, dignified steps, my mind traveled back 15 years to when this property was nothing more than a derelict gamekeeper's cottage buried in brambles and broken dreams. I'd been 53 then, newly widowed and drowning in grief. James was barely 28, still finding his feet in the financial world. The cottage had been my salvation, a project that gave me purpose when everything else seemed meaningless. I remembered that first morning when I'd arrived with my toolkit and determination, having saved every penny from my medical secretary wages. Wedding dresses for other women's daughters, school uniforms, alterations at the dry cleaners. I'd taken on every extra job available to afford this dream. The estate agent had looked at me with barely concealed skepticism. "Mrs. Whitmore, this property needs at least £40,000 of work. Are you quite certain you can manage such an undertaking?" I'd shown him my building society book with exactly that amount, saved pound by precious pound over 7 years of widowhood. James had been so proud then, helping me clear the overgrown garden, choosing the faro and ball colors for each room, deciding where to position the kitchen window to catch the morning light streaming across the valley. "Mum, you're the strongest woman I know," he'd said, embracing me on the completed terrace. "One day, when I have my own family, I'll tell them how my mother built this paradise through sheer determination and love. How had that same boy allowed his wife to humiliate me in the very place we'd built together with such hope?" I reached my car, the same trusty Fiesta that had made countless trips loaded with building supplies, plants, and furniture found in charity shops and car boot sales. But instead of driving away defeated, I sat there formulating a plan. Charlotte had made a fatal miscalculation. She'd assumed Elizabeth Whitmore was a helpless old woman who'd retreat quietly when confronted. She had no idea she was dealing with someone who'd survived the closure of 3 NHS trusts, who'd rebuilt her entire life from scratch, who'd fought planning committees and mortgage companies to create something beautiful from nothing. The rage building inside me wasn't the hot, destructive kind that makes you scream and lose control. It was cold, calculated fury, the kind that comes from decades of being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed simply for being an older woman. Charlotte had declared war on the wrong person. The Travelodge in Bourton-on-the-Water cost me £85, money I'd never planned to spend because I should have been sleeping in my own 4-poster bed, surrounded by the antique quilts I'd collected from Yorkshire markets. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Charlotte's triumphant smirk, heard her cutting words, felt the humiliation burning through me like acid. At 5:30, I was awake with my laptop, researching exactly what legal rights I had. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Property law in England was clear. No one could simply occupy someone else's home without explicit written permission. What Charlotte and her family had done constituted illegal trespass, possibly even breaking and entering if they'd used a key without authorization. But there was something else nagging at me. Charlotte's confidence seemed too absolute, too planned. This wasn't a spontaneous family gathering that had gotten out of hand. The way she'd spoken about James's agreement, her casual dismissal of my ownership, it felt rehearsed. I decided to return to the cottage early, ostensibly to collect some personal items, but really to investigate what was really happening. When I arrived at 8 o'clock, I found my own front door locked, my own bloody door. I had to ring the bell of my own home like some unwanted salesperson. Imogen answered, still in her pajamas and looking thoroughly annoyed. "What do you want now?" "Good morning," I replied with as much dignity as I could muster. "I need to collect some personal belongings, and I'd like to speak with Charlotte about this situation." "Charlotte's still sleeping, and your stuff isn't scattered about anymore. We've packed it all into bin bags in the utility room so it wouldn't be in the way." My belongings. In bin bags. In the utility room. The cottage smelled wrong. Foreign cooking, cigarettes, and that awful body spray teenagers seemed to bathe in. My sitting room was an obstacle course of airbeds and discarded clothing. The furniture I'd chosen with such care was stained and disheveled. In the kitchen, my heart nearly stopped. My beautiful kitchen, designed around the Aga I'd saved 3 years to afford, was absolutely wrecked. The hob was crusted with burned food, the Belfast sink overflowed with dishes that already smelled rancid, and they'd used my best Le Creuset pans to cook something that had left permanent stains. "Where are my grandmother's china plates?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Oh, some of those got broken," Imogen said casually. "Kids, you know how it is." Charlotte said they were probably from British home stores anyway, quite dated, really. My grandmother's Royal Albert china. The set I'd inherited and treasured, used only for special occasions, each piece irreplaceable. Broken and discarded like rubbish. Upstairs in my master bedroom, the sanctuary where I'd planned to spend these peaceful days, I found Charlotte's mother unpacking clothes into my wardrobe as if it were her own. "Excuse me," I said, fighting to maintain composure. "This is my bedroom." "Oh," Charlotte explained everything to me, she replied without looking up. "Don't worry yourself, love. I'm taking excellent care of things. I've even organized your clothes into these bags so they won't get creased." My dresses, my blouses, my shoes, everything I owned was shoved into Tesco carrier bags like items for the charity shop. 2 children I'd never seen before were asleep in my bed, and my hand-embroidered pillows were on the floor, stained with what looked like chocolate and worse. "I need you to wake these children and remove them from my bed," I said firmly. "Your bed?" she scoffed. "Don't be silly. Charlotte told me you wouldn't be needing this room anymore. The children need proper rest, not some uncomfortable sofa." I was living in a nightmare. In my own home, they were treating me like the intruder, as if my decades of work and sacrifice meant absolutely nothing. Downstairs, I found Charlotte on the terrace, drinking tea from one of my favorite Royal Worcester mugs, wearing my dressing gown, chatting on her iPhone as if she were lady of the manor. "Yes, Mummy, the cottage is absolutely divine. Don't worry, I've handled the mother-in-law situation perfectly. She understands how things work now." She was laughing as she spoke, as if my humiliation was the punchline to some private joke. When she saw me, she ended her call and looked at me with naked annoyance. "What are you doing back so early? I thought we'd made the situation quite clear yesterday." "Charlotte, we need to have a serious conversation. This cottage is legally mine. I pay the council tax, the utilities, the insurance. I have all the documentation. James has no legal right to grant permission for my property without consulting me." "Oh, please don't start with your legal drama," she said dismissively. "James is your son, isn't he? Children inherit from their parents eventually. It's only natural. Besides, we're giving this place proper family use instead of letting it molder away waiting for your occasional visits." The casual way she discussed my eventual death, as if she was simply waiting for me to hurry up and die so she could claim her inheritance, made my skin crawl. "Proper use? You've destroyed my kitchen, broken my grandmother's china, and treated my home like some holiday rental. Well, you do have rather a lot of old-fashioned things that aren't really practical for modern family life. We're doing you a favor by updating things." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman had invaded my home, destroyed my possessions, and was now claiming she'd done me a favor. But then Charlotte revealed something that chilled me to the bone. "James will be here this evening to sign some papers. We've been working with a solicitor to make everything official, you know, to avoid any confusion about ownership in the future." "Papers? What papers?" James arrived just after 6 o'clock in his silver BMW, the car he'd bought with his city bonus last year. I watched from the Travelodge car park through small binoculars I'd purchased at Argos, my heart hammering as I prepared for what might be my final conversation with my only child. He embraced Charlotte, ruffled the hair of children who weren't even his own, and acted as if this were completely normal, as if his mother hadn't been humiliated and cast out of her own home just 24 hours earlier. I waited 30 minutes before approaching the cottage, needing him to feel comfortable, to believe he was in control of whatever scheme they'd concocted. When I rang the bell, James answered with that forced smile he'd perfected as a child when caught in a lie, the same expression he'd worn when I discovered him forging my signature on permission slips at school. "Mum," he said, his voice artificially bright. "Charlotte mentioned you'd stopped by. How are you settling in at the hotel?" "Hotel?" I repeated slowly. "Is that what you think this is about? Your mother being forced to stay in a hotel while strangers occupy her home?" James fidgeted with his car keys, his old nervous habit from childhood. "It's not strangers, Mum. It's family. Charlotte's family. And I thought we'd discussed this before." "Discussed what exactly, James?" About better use of the cottage. You hardly come here anymore, and Charlotte's family needs somewhere for holidays and weekends. It makes financial sense." Financial sense to whom? But before James could answer, Charlotte appeared, slipping her arm possessively through his. "James, darling, did you bring the documents? The solicitor said everything needs to be signed this weekend." "Documents?" My blood turned to ice water. "What documents, James?" He couldn't meet my eyes. Just some paperwork. Legal stuff to make things clearer." I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone, opening the voice recording app. Something told me I'd need evidence of whatever came next. "James, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a truthful answer. Are you planning to sign documents that affect the ownership of my cottage?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Charlotte squeezed his arm encouragingly. "It's not about ownership, Mum. It's about making sure everything's properly organized for the future." "What future, James?" Charlotte stepped forward, her mask finally slipping completely. "The future where this cottage gets proper use instead of sitting empty waiting for your occasional weekend visits. The future where James's children have somewhere to make proper family memories instead of tiptoeing around your precious antiques." "James's children? These aren't even your children, Charlotte. They will be our children once we extend the cottage and have proper space for a real family." The words hung in the air like poison gas. They weren't just planning to steal my home, they were planning to expand it, to obliterate every trace of what I'd built and replace it with their own vision. "James," I said quietly, "look at me." Reluctantly, he raised his eyes to mine. "Are you really going to do this? Are you really going to steal your mother's home?" "I'm not stealing anything," he said, but his voice was hollow. I'm just securing our family's future. By destroying your mother's present." Charlotte interjected sharply. "Your son is finally acting like a man instead of a mummy's boy. It's time he put his real family first." That's when I knew. This wasn't just about the cottage. This was about Charlotte's jealousy of the relationship James and I had always shared, her need to cut me out of his life completely. "Very well," I said calmly. "I understand exactly where I stand." As I turned to leave, I heard Charlotte whisper to James, "Finally. Now we can get on with our lives without that old woman hovering over everything." But what they didn't know was that Elizabeth Whitmore had one more card to play, and it was going to destroy them both. Monday morning brought justice in a form they never saw coming. At precisely 9 o'clock, I arrived at the cottage with my solicitor, Margaret Thornfield, a police constable, and a court bailiff. Behind us came a locksmith, a professional photographer, and a representative from my insurance company. The sight of official vehicles in the drive sent Charlotte's family into immediate panic. I watched with grim satisfaction as she dropped her coffee mug, one of my good Royal Worcester pieces, and it shattered on the flagstones. "Good morning," Margaret announced in her crisp barrister's voice. "I am Mrs. Whitmore's legal representative. We have a court order for immediate possession of this property and warrants for trespassing, theft, and criminal damage." Charlotte stumbled out of the conservatory, her face white with terror. "What are you talking about? This is my husband's cottage. We have every right to be here." "Madam," The police constable replied, "Do you have any legal documentation proving your right to occupy this property?" My husband is the owner's son. He gave us permission." "And where is your husband at this moment?" He's in London. At work." Margaret opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "I have here the original deeds to this property, solely in Mrs. Elizabeth Whitmore's name. I also have council tax records, utility bills, and insurance documents spanning 15 years, all in Mrs. Whitmore's name. Additionally, I have photographs documenting extensive damage to the property and a detailed inventory of stolen items." Charlotte's mother appeared, looking confused and frightened. "What's happening? Who are these people?" "These people," I said clearly, "are here to remove you from my property and charge you with theft." The photographer began documenting everything: the damage to my kitchen, the broken china swept under rugs, the stains on my furniture, the trampled garden. Each flash of his camera captured evidence of their contempt for my life's work. "But we didn't steal anything," Charlotte protested weakly. Margaret smiled coldly. "Then perhaps you can explain the whereabouts of Mrs. Whitmore's grandmother's Royal Albert China service, valued at £800? Or her late husband's Omega watch, valued at £1,200? Or the Victorian silver candlesticks that were displayed on the mantelpiece?" Charlotte went silent. "You have exactly 1 hour to remove your personal belongings and vacate the premises," the bailiff announced. "Any attempt to remove items belonging to Mrs. Whitmore will result in additional theft charges." Just then, James's BMW tore up the gravel drive. He leaped out of the car, his face a mask of panic and rage. "What the hell is going on here?" he shouted. "Your wife and her family are being legally evicted for criminal trespassing," I replied calmly. "And you, James, are being charged as an accessory to attempted fraud." "Fraud? Mum, you've gone completely mad." Margaret handed him a legal document. "Mr. Whitmore, these are the papers you were planning to sign this weekend. Documents that would have illegally transferred your mother's property to your name based on fabricated claims of mental incapacity." James went white as he read the papers Charlotte had prepared. I never saw these before. Charlotte told me they were just organizational documents." "So you're claiming your wife acted without your knowledge?" James looked between Charlotte and me, realization dawning. "Charlotte, what the hell have you done?" But it was too late for recriminations. The damage was done, the evidence was documented, and the legal machinery was already in motion. As I watched Charlotte's family scramble to pack their belongings under police supervision, as I saw James realize the full extent of his wife's deception and his own complicity, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, but profound sadness. This cottage, built with love and hope for family gatherings and shared memories, had become a battlefield. The son I'd raised with such devotion had chosen his wife's lies over his mother's truth. But sometimes, when people show you who they really are, the kindest thing you can do is believe them. 6 months later, I received a letter from James. Not a phone call, not a visit, but a letter. He begged for forgiveness, claimed Charlotte had manipulated him, insisted he'd learned his lesson. I never replied. The cottage belongs to the National Trust now. My will ensures it will be preserved exactly as I restored it, a testament to what one determined woman can accomplish when underestimated by those who should have known better. And sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings, I drive past and see families enjoying the garden I created, children playing safely among the roses I planted, couples sharing afternoon tea in the conservatory I designed. It's not the future I'd planned, but it's a future where love and hard work are respected, where beauty is preserved, and where Elizabeth Whitmore's legacy will endure long after those who betrayed her have been forgotten. That, I've discovered, is the sweetest revenge of all.